Tonight on Bridge City News, if you enjoy traveling to Europe, it'll soon cost you a bit more. We hear from an aviation expert who explains how there may have been many factors involved in the Ethiopian Airlines crash which killed 157 people, including 18 Canadians. And in Lethbridge, Exhibition Park now has made it easier for you to purchase tickets. We have the details. We begin tonight in the United Kingdom, where British Parliament voted for the second time to reject Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal. Of the 634 votes, May needed 318. Instead, 391 members voted against the deal. This was despite May claiming victory and agreeing to legally binding changes with Brussels designed to win support from MPs. The latest version of the deal, which aimed to ensure Northern Irish backstop would be temporary, was met with skepticism from the opposition and from within her own party. Tomorrow, lawmakers will be given the chance to vote on whether they support leaving the EU without a deal. If you enjoy flying to Europe, your trip will become a little more complicated and pricier. It's thanks to the European Travel Information and Authorization System. The ETIAS will apply to visitors from non-European countries, including Canada and the United States. Officials say its goal is to strengthen security checks. Some travelers are saying the extra cost may impact their travel plans.
A lot of the reason why I travel to certain areas is because, one, it's affordable. Simply put, I have to be able to afford to go there, and I'm kind of a student, so I have to take into account for price a lot. So, yeah. Long term, I don't think that's going to matter very much, because one, in our society, we have this big thing of, oh, I'm going to take a year off school and go to Europe for a year, and I know a lot of people who still really want to do that. Canadians, we're really resourceful in what we want to do, so if we want to go, we're going to go anyways, whether that be from flying to, let's say, Morocco, then going up into Europe through there, or finding alternate means of getting to Europe, but ultimately we'd end up going there regardless.
The new rules take effect in 2021. Canadians will pay an extra $11 to apply for the special approval, but it will last 3 years. It will allow you to enter countries in the Schengen zone, which consists of 26 nations, including France, Italy, and Spain. An aviation expert says investigators can expect to find many factors as they look for the cause of an Ethiopian Airlines crash that killed 157, including 18 Canadians. The plane was a Boeing 737 MAX 8, the latest version of the widely used jetliner.
It's never one thing, it's always multiple combination of factors that lead to a catastrophic accident like this. And so that is what we can expect. The 737 itself is an extremely reliable aircraft. It has been in service for decades. This is the newest evolution of it. Whenever you have a new change or a new aircraft or a substantially different model, as in this case, the engines are different to get a more economical fuel burn, and they are moved forward, changing the weight and balance of the aircraft. So there are substantial changes to the airplane. Whenever you get this, there are often issues that come up that are unanticipated, and if they must be dealt with immediately and significantly, the FAA will issue an airworthiness directive. An airworthiness directive is a correction of some generally mechanical thing or procedure that is issued by the FAA. It is a directive to either a manufacturer or, in this case, to an aircraft operator to say, you must do this in order to bring the operation of that aircraft into a safe, airworthy state.
Boeing stock is down for a second straight day as a growing list of countries are grounding its 737 MAX 8 jets following Sunday's crash. Regulators in Britain are the latest to announce a temporary ban on the MAX 8 planes operating its airspace following the second crash involving the jets in less than 5 months. Other countries suspending all flights by MAX 8 aircraft include Germany, France, Ireland, Australia, Oman, and Malaysia. Federal Transport Minister Mark Garneau says such a ban is premature in Canada, and his department is working with American authorities to determine if action is required. Closer to home, Exhibition Park is moving into the modern age. You can now purchase your tickets digitally. Now when you arrive at the venue, your tickets can be scanned on your smartphone.
One of the main goals we had here for 2019 and into the future was to evolve our business. We really want to understand the client better and really give them accessibility to the park. And And one of the things that we felt we were behind on compared to industry norm was the introduction of the digital ticketing platform. The option to buy online, purchase on your phone. We will have scannable technology now, so you will be able to bring your phone as your ticket to enter all the events here at Exhibition Park. So really it's an advanced ticketing option to increase the convenience and accessibility here at Exhibition Park.
Exhibition Park also announced the X-VIP program, which allows for guests to enjoy exclusive promotions, advanced tickets, and up-to-date information. On March 22nd, BDO is hosting its 7th annual Home and Garden Economic Forecast Breakfast at 8 a.m. That'll take place at Exhibition Park. The driver of a commercial vehicle has been charged after several power poles were hit in downtown Lethbridge yesterday. A one-block area between 3rd and 4th Ave along 8th Street was closed for hours while police and other EMS crews attended the scene. According to police, the vehicle in question was driven with its crane partially extended, resulting in the overhead power lines being caught. Several poles broke and fell over, with one hitting a parked car with a person seated inside. Fortunately, that person was not injured. No word yet on the cost of repairing the lines or when new poles will be installed. Alberta's health minister says UCP leader Jason Kenney's plans to scrap a super lab at Edmonton is short-sighted. Sarah Hoffman says site preparation has already begun on University of Alberta land south of the main campus. Kenney says the UCP government would also revisit a plan to put all laboratory services under government control. Mike Parker, president of the Alberta Sciences Association of Alberta, says the current Edmonton lab used by Dynalife is stretched beyond the breaking point. Many of us know people who are on waiting lists to get an MRI done or for surgeries like knee or hip replacements. Sometimes those wait times can be 6 months or even a year. Bacchus Barua, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute, says it wasn't always this bad in our province for wait times.
When we started measuring the wait times in the early 1990s, the wait time was only 10 weeks in Alberta. So this is a consistent deterioration that we've seen in the province right across the board.
Catch my full interview with Bacchus Barua discussing healthcare challenges in Alberta. It's coming up in the second half of our show. Starting this September, cell phones will be banned in Ontario classrooms during instructional time. Ontario Education Minister Lisa Thompson made the announcement in a statement earlier today. A debate continues about what might be the biggest distraction kids face today, which would include mobile devices in the classroom. Where some see cell phones as a necessary and complementary teaching tool, others view them as a nuisance, one which is wreaking havoc on students' ability to learn. Garrett Simmons, Communications Officer for Lethbridge School District number 51, says so far there's no potential move from Alberta to ban cell phones in the classrooms here. The mother of a slain CFL player says she wishes Canada had the death penalty after a 21-year-old man was convicted in her son's death. Renee Hill came to Calgary from Detroit to hear the verdict as the judge found that Nelson Lugela guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Mylan Hicks.
I knew I was going to get the verdict that was laid down. I knew that. And we got together, we held hands, and I told the Lord a couple of things. I said, Jesus, Mylan belonged to you. And I said, take care of Mylan's business today. And he did. I asked him why. Why, Lugela? Why? I still would like to know why, even though I already know why. There was no reason. Heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, redundant statements and witness things that I had to hear in there that caused me to storm out. Every time I heard, I hit him twice. And it doesn't look good for him. Every time I heard the prosecutor or the defense raised the issue that he aimed, he shot, I took that blow.
The former Calgary Stampeder was shot to death outside of a bar in September of 2016. Hill cried throughout the judge's decision, but said outside court that it is good to have another killer off the streets. The RCMP said it is looking for two separate drivers who failed to stop after hitting the same man northwest of Edmonton. Police say the 52-year-old man remains in hospital after he was injured in St. Albert on February 26th. They say the man was hit by a northbound truck, then was hit by a southbound vehicle. Mounties say it is possible the drivers did not realize they'd run over the man and they want to chat with them. Two teenagers in Regina have been charged with attempted murder following a shooting on the weekend. Police say a 23-year-old man was taken to hospital with serious injuries after he was shot on Saturday. Police say they arrested an 18 and 17-year-old and seized a gun and ammunition. The 18-year-old man made his first court appearance in provincial court today, while the teenager appeared in youth court. Ottawa's announced $11.9 million in funding to help fight gun and gang crime in Saskatchewan. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale says the funding will be spread out over 5 years and will go towards reducing violent crime, making communities safer, and reducing demand on the justice system. Goodale says the government is taking the right steps to make communities safer by striking at the root of the guns and gang problem and to stop vulnerable youth from joining gangs. The internet has opened us up to a world of information. For the most part, it's great news. Unfortunately, the online world has a negative impact on newspapers, not only in Canada, but in the United States as well. Newspapers in more than 1,400 cities and towns south of the border have shut down over the past 15 years. As we hear and see in this next report, no local papers often leave residents without a reliable source of local news and a lost sense of community.
Waynesville and St. Robert in the Missouri Ozarks are sister cities rich in military history. They have an army post and modern conveniences like a Walmart supercenter. But one thing you won't find here, a daily newspaper. The Daily Guide traces back to 1962, but it closed its doors last September, replaced by a weekly shopper.
I was pretty sure the future of news was going to be online. I just didn't expect the total falling off the cliff that's occurred with print media.
According to an AP analysis of data compiled by the University of North Carolina, more than 1,400 cities and towns across the country have lost a newspaper in the last 15 years. For the residents of these cities, it's more than a loss of legal notices, obituaries, school sporting news, and other local news.
We did have good coverage where they covered local events and got the news out to the local community. And that's a lot of the display here. Otherwise, that history would have been lost.
Son Tommy.
Without the Daily Guide, Pulaski County Sheriff Jimmy Bench didn't have a way to share with the community the devastating impact of the opioid epidemic on his family.
My son overdosed over opioids, and I just would like to get out to other people. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, your family, any family member at any time could have an opioid problem.
Ryan Bench's death would have been front page news. His family instead relied on a tribute from Ryan's brother, posted on Facebook, to get the word out.
I will always remember the good memories, but won't forgive you for the bad ones. We love you, Ryan. And that was from my son.
Others are trying to keep journalism alive. Daryl Todd Marina created a Facebook page called Pulaski County Daily News. He makes a point of attending as many public meetings as he can. Sometimes that means leaving a recorder at one meeting to attend another.
A city council knew that if somebody did something stupid, it was going to be all over the paper whenever the paper came out, whether it was a daily or weekly. But we're now developing an America in which people have no idea what their elected officials are doing because the elected officials never everybody showing up at their meetings.
Leaving a void that communities are struggling to fill. Peter Banda, Associated Press, Waynesville, Missouri.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is lashing out at Russia and Cuba for continuing to support Nicolas Maduro's regime in Venezuela. He says they're contributing to the country's economic crisis.
No nation has done more to sustain the death and daily misery of ordinary Venezuelans, including Venezuela's military and their families, than the communists in Havana. Cuba is the true imperialist power in Venezuela. The Cuban government of Miguel Diaz-Canel provides political cover for Maduro and his henchmen so that they may stay in power. Russia, too, has created this crisis. It, too, for its own reasons, is thwarting the Venezuelan people's legitimate democratic hopes and their dreams. Moscow, like Havana, continues to provide political cover to Maduro regime while pressuring countries to disregard the democratic legitimacy of the interim president Guaido.
As you've heard on Bridge City News, the ISIS threat is not as strong in the Middle East, but it's gained a lot of momentum in the Philippines. Our ISIS and foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has the details.
So the Philippines is one of those places where ISIS has had success in growing. And why is that? Because there has always been, for the past decade or so, this growing disenchantment between the Muslim population and the local population in the Philippines. And what does ISIS do best? They take advantage of these rifts in society, just like they did in Iraq, just like they did in Syria, and they come up that way.
Catch my full interview with Lisa discussing some of the biggest ISIS strongholds and where they remain. That's coming up after business news. It was on this date that serial killer John Wayne Gacy Jr. is found guilty of murdering 33 men and boys, and the musical Les Mis opens. This is Today in History for March the 12th.
March 12, 1938. In Europe, Nazi Germany's troops march into neighboring Austria. The next day, Adolf Hitler annexes his homeland. Austria remains part of Nazi Germany until the final days of World War II. 1933.
My friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking.
President Franklin D. Roosevelt gives the first of his fireside chats on radio. He tells Americans what steps he's taking to deal with the Great Depression. 1980. In Chicago, a jury finds John Wayne Gacy Jr. guilty of murdering 33 men and boys. Bernard Carey is the prosecutor at Gacy's trial.
Certainly in the history of this country, there's been no single murder trial with as many victims, nor, I think, we'll ever find a man as evil as John Wayne Gacy.
The next day, Gacy is sentenced to death. He's executed more than 14 years later. 1912. Juliet Gordon Low creates the Girl Guides, which later become the Girl Scouts of America. And 1987.
At the end of the day, you're another day older. And that's all you can say for the life of the poor.
In New York, the musical Les Miserables opens on Broadway. Today in history, March 12th. Ross Simpson, The Associated Press.
We had more snow today, and more of the white stuff is on the way tonight. A complete look at the weather forecast is coming up shortly. We had more of the white stuff today. Tonight, more flurries developing with a low near -5. Light snow tapering off tomorrow with a high near -1. A high-pressure system returns on Thursday, clearing out the clouds and bringing us a high near 4. Sunshine and 4 degrees as well for Friday. A nice weekend is also shaping up. Sunshine and 7 on Saturday, a blue sky and 12 degrees for Sunday. Monday even warmer as the mercury should climb all the way up to 14 degrees. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 5 and an average low of -7. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 2007 at 18 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -26 in 1950. Sunrise was at 7:52, sunset at 7:30. Looking at tomorrow's national temperatures now, Vancouver will have a mixture of sun and cloud and should see a high near 9. Mainly cloudy in Victoria tomorrow and high expected near 10. Calgary should receive lots of sunshine as well and a high near 2. Mainly sunny in Edmonton on Wednesday with a high near 4. Expect 0 under a mainly cloudy sky in Regina tomorrow. Clearing and 0 as well for Saskatoon. Increasing cloud at +1 for Winnipeg. A good chance of showers and 5 degrees for Toronto. Ottawa will have light flurries and +1. Montreal will also receive snow and 1 degree. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be partly cloudy and 4. Halifax, Nova Scotia should get up to 4 degrees as well tomorrow. Charlottetown, PEI will be mainly sunny and 0. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect light flurries and 0 as well. Transportation Minister Mark Garneau is advising Canadians to stand by and wait for the investigation into the jet crash in Ethiopia to bring results. He says it would be premature to make Canadian Airlines ground their Boeing 737 MAX 8 planes, the kind that crashed on Sunday, killing 157 people. The crash raised concerns over parallels to a Lion Air crash of the same model of aircraft last October, which killed 189 people. Garneau says people should not jump to conclusions about the cause of the crash. Close to 84,000 vehicles in Canada are affected by the latest massive Honda recall linked to Takata airbags. Honda's recalling 1.2 million vehicles because the airbag inflators can explode and send shrapnel into the passenger compartment. The new recall includes many Honda and Acura models from 2001 to 2010. At least 23 people have been killed around the world because of a defect in Takata airbags. The president of the United Auto Workers Union is warning automakers the union is prepared to strike if upcoming contract talks go south. Gary Jones says weekly strike pay would go from $200 to $250 per week and up to $275 in January of next year. The new union president says no one expects a strike, but raising payments is a symbol to members that the union has their backs. Talks with Ford, General Motors, and Fiat Chrysler begin this summer. The 4-year contracts with all three expire on September 15th. Farmers are being reminded about the importance of ensuring machinery is working properly to prevent injuries or deaths. The message was delivered by the PEI Workers' Compensation Board as Canadian Agricultural Safety Week began yesterday. The board says now is an ideal time to inspect power takeoff drive equipment to ensure guards are in place and working properly. Equipment entanglement is one of the leading causes of farm fatalities. According to the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, from 2003 to 2012, there were 61 deaths on Canadian farms caused by entanglement. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, British Parliament voted for the second time to reject Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal. Of the 634 votes, May needed 318. Instead, 391 members voted against the deal. ISIS is gaining a major stronghold not in the Middle East, but now in the Philippines. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Looking to sell some extra items after decluttering your home? Come and sell your old treasures at the Windy City Bazaar Flea Market and Yard Sale on Saturday, March 16th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. at the Royal Canadian Legion in Lethbridge. This is also open to small home-based businesses looking to sell and market their products. For vendor inquiries, email lethbridgewindycitybazaar@gmail.com. And for more information, check it out on Facebook, Windy City Bazaar Flea Market and Yard Sale. It's the 15th annual Woods Homes Children's Benefit Gala taking place Saturday, March 30th at 6 p.m. at the Coast Hotel, Lethbridge. This special night is in support of the emergency youth shelter, The Core. This year's gala includes a delicious dinner, silent and live auctions, and live entertainment by the Chevelles. For tickets and sponsorship opportunities, contact Colleen Campbell by calling 403-317-1777 or visit woodshomes.ca. The Lethbridge Association of the Blind provides numerous activities for the blind and visually impaired in the Lethbridge area. These events include dinners with entertainment, local museum tours, and much more. For more information, call 403-942-1677 or email brownwj@shaw.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
More details are coming in from the tragic Ethiopian Airlines crash, which claimed the lives of 157 people, including 18 Canadians. To talk more about this horrific tragedy is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me from Los Angeles. Lisa, this tragedy was felt around the world as people from 35 countries were killed. Do we know yet what caused the crash?
Not specifically, but there are some patterns that they're seeing. This is similar to the Lion Airlines flight that we saw in Indonesia in the fall. Both flights crashing minutes after taking off. And of course, the question begs, what was wrong with the engines or the mechanism that caused these planes to crash so soon after taking off? So there will be investigations. Many countries not allowing their 737s to take off until there are some answers here, for fear that this is something that's more than just a coincidence and there's a pattern involved. So very, very sad. There are members of the UN, obviously citizens from the US and Canada and many other countries. So again, as you said, felt around the world.
A story we will definitely continue to follow here. The ISIS threat is dwindling in the Middle East, but Lisa, it's gaining momentum in the Philippines. Tell me more about that.
Yes, we've talked about this before in the sense that, we talk about ISIS dying down in certain parts of the world, but definitely gaining momentum in other parts. And the Philippines is one of those places where ISIS has had success in growing. And why is that? Because there has always been, for the past decade or so, this growing disenchantment between the Muslim population and the local population in the Philippines. And what does ISIS do best? They take advantage of these rifts in society, just like they did in Iraq, just like they did in Syria, and they come up that way. So what do? They basically embed themselves in society. They start launching these suicide attacks in civilian locations, exactly what they've been doing in churches and other heavily populated civilian areas in the Philippines, to, again, terrorize, to instill this intimidation and fear among the local population. The good news is that the authorities in the Philippines are cracking down. This is a zero tolerance policy against terrorism, against insurgencies, and of course against ISIS. So we have to keep our eyes on the places where they can grow their influence, grow another caliphate, and launch attacks from these headquarters. And when you see a place like the Philippines, where they are heavily popular or growing in number there in the Sinai Peninsula, but again, the good news being in both places that I mentioned, there is a heavy crackdown by local authorities to get rid of this influence.
U.S. airstrikes kill hundreds in Somalia as a shadowy conflict wraps up, and 13 civilians were reportedly killed by U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan. Let's chat a bit about that.
Yes, so these are targeted airstrikes. This is a policy that, the Obama administration also followed, but the Trump administration heavily follows these targeted strikes in order not to get involved, but to get rid of the problem before it becomes a bigger problem, particularly if we want to speak about the threat in Somalia. This is Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda splinter group, and I always hate to use the term splinter group because they are part of Al-Qaeda. It doesn't make them any less potent or any less brutal as a terror organization. But the United States has seen them as a growing, metastasizing cancer within Africa, somewhere where people aren't looking particularly, with regards to terrorism. And again, where there is this rift or this political uncertainty or poverty, that's where these insurgencies have the best chance of growing. And Afghanistan, Hal, you and I talk about this almost on a weekly basis, about the precariousness of the political situation there. That country has been in constant turmoil for decades, being taken advantage of by the Russians and then the Taliban, and it just keeps going. And of course, the West is trying to curb the Taliban, to have talks with the Taliban, to come to terms with the Taliban. And again, understanding that they are a terror organization with their own set of requirements and own set of standards when it comes to coming to the negotiating table. So the suicide bombs continue in Afghanistan, and you and I have talked about this, again, being in civilian areas, but these targeted strikes are meant to take out key players so that, again, these groups don't start to grow and metastasize in areas where there are civilian populations.
Is there any way we can maybe cut down on the civilian casualties? Is it because the terrorist groups are using a lot of people as human shields?
Absolutely, they are, and that is a tactic that they've used for years. I mean, it looks bad that the U.S. strike takes out X amount of civilians, right? And they do that because they want the local population to be scared and intimidated. That is the sheer definition of terrorism. So until forces on the ground or local authorities are able to weed them out, it becomes very daunting. It becomes very, very, very difficult. What these terrorists usually do, if you've looked into their tactics, it's a grid system. They try to put one terrorist on a block in every community to silence people. They feed them. They give them this fake feeling of security and that they're going to take care of them. Especially in the case of Afghanistan, they put up soup kitchens and madrasas and cultural centers so that the people can gain confidence in the Taliban and say, well, they're the only ones taking care of us. This exact replicated narrative we saw in Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood setting up the same type of system, or Hamas doing that to the Palestinian people, gaining their respect and trust, and then becoming their elected officials. Of course, that hasn't worked out for them whatsoever. But we have to take a lesson from that and say this is how they embed themselves within society, but that's also why we have these civilian casualties.
The U.S. is in a bit of a tough spot when it comes to North Korea. The Asian nation is asking for food aid on one hand, but on the other, Lisa, we see satellite footage of a potential rocket launch a week before the Hanoi summit.
Right. And I think the more awkward position is for Donald Trump, who walked away from a bad deal with the North Koreans, and rightfully so, thinking that, well, down the line, the North Koreans will come around and we will get a good deal, or at least one that benefits the United States and will lead to a path of denuclearization. In the meantime, it doesn't look like we're headed towards a successful resolution between the two, because the North Koreans, as you said, on the one hand, are pleading for help. They need the aid. But on the other, as you said, there are these conflicting reports that even a week before they arrived to Hanoi, they were testing sites and active within their nuclear program. Doesn't paint a convincing story that Kim Jong-un came to the negotiating table willing to cut a deal, but he came anyway. So the question becomes, is he trying to dupe the United States into removing the sanctions so that he can get the economic breathing space to go home and boast about it in front of his constituents? Well, he picked the wrong person to dupe. I don't think Donald Trump's going to fall for that. And as we saw, he was able to walk away from the Hanoi deal and say no deal. So, is this a waste of time? Perhaps. But just the fact that they both came to the negotiating table gave people hope that there will be something down the line. Now, whether, Kim Jong-un is willing to loosen kind of his reign and give up some of this nuclear program is yet to be determined. Doesn't look that way right now.
Two of the world's largest economic powers are still talking trade, which is good for all of us. Lisa, consensus has apparently been reached between the U.S. and China on many key issues.
Right, and the biggest key issue for the United States still remains to be seen. The United States alleges that China manipulated global trade by deflating their own economy, therefore having better prices on their goods so that their goods would have an advantage over American goods and other goods on the international markets. And that is something that Donald Trump has been talking about before Donald Trump was even a candidate or even thought about running for office. So, he's on to them, and he's on to the advantages that the Chinese have given themselves over many, many years. So I think that this is what the United States will lead with. But we have reports that they have come to some sort of understanding on these key issues. And one report said that these aren't new issues. So perhaps this is the issue that they were able to come to a resolution about. Again, Donald Trump is after evening the playing field and having countries that have been taking advantage of certain global opportunities to pay their fair share. And this falls right under that category. Will the Chinese pay their fair share and play by the rules if they want to benefit from the global market?
The problems in Venezuela continue, and we're talking, rotting food on trucks and power outages putting hospital patients at risk.
Yes, this is so sad. If you see any of the footage coming out of Venezuela over the last 24 hours, there is a complete blackout, and people have obviously are challenged to find food and medical care and phone their loved ones. As we've said many times, Hal, this is going to get much worse before it gets any better. I don't think Maduro is going to give up. As we're seeing, he's not, but he's not going to give up so easily. He's holding on to whatever he can. It's going to be the revolution of attrition, meaning he will have to hold on and will hold on until his constituents and the military mostly kind of dwindle away and they start defecting to the point where he cannot hold on to power any longer. The Venezuelan opposition leader, Guaido, and his supporters have the backing of the international community, of the United States, of the West, of the UN, of the EU, many, many countries in the surrounding areas in Latin America. And obviously the bad players are the bad players, and they will hold on to this proxy war, and they will oppose the United States and other nations in Venezuela. So same list, the North Koreans and the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians and the Turks, they will support Maduro, but to what extent are they willing to go to support this rogue dictator and this humanitarian crisis that he's created?
While we celebrated International Women's Day in many countries around the world, in Turkey, police had to break up a crowd with tear gas?
Well, yes, this is an interesting story because Women's Day is celebrated all around the world. But as of late, Erdogan's policies and what he has created in his de facto dictatorship have left very, very, very few freedoms for the people of Turkey. The women have felt taken back many centuries from the time of Ataturk, who gave the people of Turkey so many freedoms. They're looking more like Saudi Arabia every single day. If you look at many of the freedoms that were taken away from the people, the fact that Erdogan has closed magazines and newspapers and television news stations and created really a de facto dictatorship to control the population. So now you have people on the street, and he won't have it. He won't have it because he knows what happened in Iran 40 years ago led to the toppling of that regime. He will not allow that to happen. We've always said that Erdogan takes his lessons from the Iranian regime, and he's creating this de facto dictatorship in order to make his reign on the country ironclad. He has become more and more rogue, both at home and abroad. And now that he's realigned himself with this nefarious the kind of trio in Russia and Iran in Syria, I think they feel more secure to be more rogue, both at home and abroad in Venezuela and in other parts of the world. So this is a very unfortunate shift in the direction and the progression that Turkey had made as a country.
Many North Americans, including yours truly, still trying to recover from losing an hour's sleep thanks to springing forward with daylight savings time. But there's a group, Lisa, of countries which has decided to scrap the twice-yearly clock change. The European Union says they won't be changing the clocks, but there's a 2-year delay to the year 2021.
Yes, I am so jealous. Well, here in the United States, Arizona picked up on this a while ago, and they don't buy into this. You know, I don't know why we do this, and I wasn't the only one. I'm happy yawning yesterday because it seems like, Hal, you've been having a tough time as well. It's an interesting thing that we just do, right? So, and when you ask the question, why do we change the clocks? I don't think there's really an answer anymore. We have plenty of electricity and technological advances to allow us to have the same time zone year-round. And the differences between here and the Middle East or here and Europe and, between you and I, how we try to figure out what time our hits are going to be, it's already enough of a challenge without the time change. So I think it would be great if the global, all countries could kind of sign on to this and we wouldn't have any time changes for the seasons. It would be wonderful. So the Europeans are going in the right direction, but as you said, they're not going to employ this for another 2 years.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
The feds, provinces, and territories continue to increase healthcare spending, many say at an unsustainable rate. Yet it seems that wait times for medically necessary procedures are not generally improving. Is there a way to change this? Today's guest may have a few suggestions. Bacchus Brua is the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute in Vancouver. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Bacchus.
Thanks so much for having me on the show again.
I see that the study found on a per capita basis, Alberta's provincial spending ranked second highest in Canada, but in performance, we don't seem to be getting the best bang for our buck.
Yes, Alberta's story is really very much like Canada's more generally. Canada is a very, very high spending country compared to other systems with universal healthcare. But in terms of performance, we just really don't see it. We're usually in the middle of the pack when it comes to physicians per capita. We're usually in the middle of the pack when it comes to nurses, outcomes, things like that. And actually quite poorly when we look at an international scale when it comes to the resources. In Alberta, we find a very, very similar story where Alberta is the second highest spender per capita. It's consuming 40% of its budgets, and yet when it comes to physicians per capita, it's middle of the pack, nurses middle of the pack, CTs, MRI scanners middle of the pack. So there's a problem between the translation between what's being put into the system and what's actually coming out of it. And I think what we see most clearly is when we look at wait times. Alberta had a wait time of 26 weeks between referral to treatment last year, which shows you that there's a lot of rationing going on in the system.
So how long would it take for somebody in Alberta to get a knee replacement or even get an MRI done?
Well, this particular study doesn't look at that. We look at that in our wait times studies. In general, when we're looking at 12 different specialties, which is looking at things like orthopedics, as you mentioned, but also things like gynecology, internal medicine, and so on and so forth, the wait time was 26 weeks. And just for some context, when we started measuring the wait times in the early 1990s, the wait time was only 10 weeks in Alberta. So this is a consistent deterioration that we've seen in the province right across the board.
So a lot of solutions for many of these politicians is just throw some more money at it, and that'll take care of the problem. But usually when you do that, that means higher taxes. How well has that worked out so far for us?
Unfortunately, Alberta for a very long time has consistently increased its spending far above the rates of what otherwise would be sustainable. And I think we're seeing it now when revenues are not coming in quite as much, it's starting to have to tighten its belt. But this has been a very, very old and long problem where politicians have tried to solve the wait times issue, tried to solve the rationing in our healthcare system by throwing money at the problem, and it just doesn't work, and that's what we see in Alberta. Fortunately, there are, however, a lot of policies that the province can pursue well within the confines of the Canada Health Act, and some policies it should also look at which do go beyond the Canada Health Act, which is a significant barrier for provinces when it comes to experimenting with policies that are routinely used in other countries with universal healthcare. And that's what this study is really about. We're looking at what can Alberta do in terms of policy to actually tackle the problems that it's facing currently in its healthcare system.
Now, you make some suggestions as to how Alberta can get better results. We need to expand capacity and create more competition among private providers, but that's a word that sometimes scares people. Bacchus, private.
Well, let's start with some of the basics. When we think about universal healthcare in Canada, we unfortunately have a tendency to only think about it as a government healthcare system. That's simply not the case. When we look at other countries with universal healthcare, and yes, there are several other countries, 28 at the last count that we did with universal healthcare, they usually provide it through a combination of public or government financing and delivery, but as well as private not-for-profit, as well as private for-profit financing and delivery. And most of these other countries, I'm talking about, countries like Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, France, Sweden, and Australia, they understand that it's only through working together with public and private delivery systems and financing systems that they're actually able to deliver better care on universal terms to patients regardless of ability to pay.
So using third-party private clinics to provide publicly funded healthcare services is not necessarily illegal, is it?
Well, we actually have good evidence in Canada to show that this does work. It doesn't actually contravene the Canada Health Act at all. Before I get into the legality, let me explain maybe a little bit about the Canada Health Act. I think a lot of people think about this as something about something that defines the rights in terms of the healthcare system, but really it's a financial tool. It's simply an instrument that dictates how federal funds are transferred from the federal government to the provinces. And if the provinces don't meet the requirements according to the federal government of the day, then the federal government withholds cash funds. Now, some of these things are absolutely clear in terms of what the province can and can't do. So things like cost sharing and co-payments within the public system, there are very, very clear terms in the CHA that says that provinces will incur a financial penalty. But there are other terms that are far less clear and much bigger and open to interpretation. And that actually creates quite a lot of an issue in terms of what provinces can and can't do. So you have a lot of hesitation with provincial governments. But one really clear example that we can see is the province of Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan went from having some of the longest wait times in the country in about 2008. I think the wait times was about 28 weeks at that time, to currently actually having the shortest wait times in the country of about 15 weeks. Now, it did a combination of different things through its Saskatchewan Surgical Initiative, many of which are at the hospital level. Some of which are, more common sense things that we will see as we have a higher integration of technology in our healthcare system. So, for example, a centralized pooling system to pool referrals, which just generates a lot of efficiencies in terms of the referral system. But what it also did was it did actually contract out services to third-party private clinics. And they were able to do it at a cost that was actually 26 or 27% lower per procedure. And what it does is it massively managed to expand capacity, create a lot of competition within the system, And we see the results. The results is that Saskatchewan today actually has some of the shortest wait times. There's no contravention of the Canada Health Act. This is something that Alberta has actually already experimented with in the early 2000s, but there's a long way to go. There are a lot of prohibitions within provincial legislation that could be taken out that would actually help it be, or rather blossom into the sort of competitive system to deliver services to patients that it really should be.
Now, you say Alberta law requires all major surgical procedures be delivered in a public hospital, but that should change to allow for private hospitals to provide surgeries?
Well, the legislation is very specific in terms of, what qualifies as a hospital as opposed to what qualifies as a clinic. And this is really just, it creates a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty about what can and cannot be done. I think there's a lot that the province could do in terms of just clarifying the legislation, making it a lot simpler to say that, okay, if a private facility that already exists is able to deliver services that are publicly financed by the government, and can add to capacity, then it should be allowed to do so. If there's a patient who's waiting for treatment, and if there's a private facility that's able to deliver without actually needing to hire extra doctors or build a new building, then they should just be allowed to do it. Allow the system to actually work. But this of course is just one of the things that would hopefully help improve Alberta's healthcare system. And I would say in some ways it's a Band-Aid fix because, for example, at best we can imagine that maybe Alberta's, things like this would help Alberta's wait time come down from 26 weeks to the 15 weeks that we see in Saskatchewan. But, this is nowhere near what we see in terms of wait times in other countries like Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands. They often have wait times that are just a few weeks or no wait times at all in some circumstances. And once we get into the systems that are in place in those countries, that's where things get a little bit more difficult. But there is a lot that Alberta can do well within the confines of the CHA.
So does Alberta need to change the way it funds hospitals? Apparently activity-based funding results in improved quality and reduced wait times. Can you explain to our viewers how that works?
Sure. The current system of funding that we generally have in Canada is what's called a system of global budgeting. And essentially, hospitals have a set budget based on the population that they serve, and they have to work within that budget because there is only one funder, and that's the government. Now, what this does, however, is it tends to make hospitals treat patients as a cost to the system that's eating away into the budget. Most other countries over the last 10, 15 years have switched to what's called an activity-based funding model. And what this does is it actually is a system where hospitals are paid according to the number of cases and the types of cases that are actually being delivered in the hospital. So the incentive over there for the hospital is to actually treat more patients. And importantly, if there are two hospitals and a patient needs to go to one of the two, it'll actually create competition between those hospitals because they would actually get funds if they actually treat the patient. Whereas over here we have a system where essentially the incentive, although I'm not saying that hospitals would necessarily do that, but the incentive is for a hospital to actually have a patient, a very expensive or complex case patient, go to a different hospital because it'll eat into their budget. So that's just one of this, one of the interesting things. And I think, especially again, if you add that to the third-party private providers, that would create a very robust competitive environment where it, to the patient, it really shouldn't matter whether the hospital is owned by the government or whether it's a private for-profit facility or not. For the patient, all that should matter is that they are getting treated in a timely manner. And these are two things that can help that actually happen.
So if we created a centralized surgical registry and started pooling referrals, you believe that would improve efficiencies?
Well, that's definitely one of the things that Saskatchewan did. Currently, we have a system where, like many other countries, when you go to your family doctor and need to get treatment, you are first referred to a specialist. Now, what's happening right now is that the family doctor does not have complete information about all the specialists in the province, what their wait times are, who has the shortest wait list, and the patient has very little choice in terms of that as well. Alberta's done a good job in terms of updating a lot of that information over there, but really this needs to be, or at least what Saskatchewan did, is a system where all the referrals go into a centralized pool, and patients are given the option of having a consultation with a specialist with the shortest wait times, while retaining, of course, the right to wait longer for a specialist that them or their family doctor would rather prefer. This is one of those things which is, I call it a little bit of a no-brainer, but it's one of those things that will improve efficiency. It'll do it at the margins, but it's certainly, again, when we're talking about something like this, there's no issues in terms of the Canada Health Act or issues like that. It's something that Saskatchewan has done, and I think Alberta is probably moving towards it already. It's got a couple of small pilot programs, but it would certainly improve efficiency in the province.
So does federal law allow provinces to let individuals use private insurance or maybe pay out of pocket for a doctor to deliver medically necessary services?
Now, here's where things get very, very difficult. The key issue with the Canada Health Act is the issue of hospitals that are sharing the cost, or insurance that shares the cost with the public system. When the costs are shared with the public system, then the central tenets of the Canada Health Act become very, very specific in terms of the penalties that the province will incur. However, for example, if we take an extreme case where you have a private parallel system where everything is insured completely, everything is paid out of pocket, there's nothing really in terms of federal legislation that's preventing that from taking place. It's really actually, it starts to become provincial legislation that's currently hampering that. But my understanding is that a lot of that provincial legislation came in because of the ambiguity in the federal legislation, which leads to a situation where you might have the government of the day suddenly decide that perhaps that's impeding reasonable access, or this could possibly maybe result in some sort of a two-tier system or issues like that. And it's really that ambiguity that causes a lot of issues. But in terms of the actual legislation, if things are fully privately funded and delivered outside the public system, there really shouldn't be any issues.
So Bacchus, let's talk a bit about dual practice, which would permit physicians and other healthcare professionals to work in both the private and public sectors. Is this currently legal in Canada and in Alberta?
Well, this is something which, interestingly, there's no federal restrictions on it. However, again, there are many of the provinces have either direct things impeding this from happening, or have disincentives. Alberta is actually pretty good about it, but the thing is, everything else, when it comes to what it restricts in terms of private financing, in terms of the rates that physicians would charge in the two different practices, in terms of what surgeries can actually be delivered in the two different cases, leads to a situation where it's essentially a status disincentive for physicians. And I think with dual practice, one of the things that we have to remember is that while a lot of people might be afraid that it might result in physicians moving away from the public system to the private system, it's only if you actually restrict dual practice that might actually happen. However, if you actually allow it and actually encourage it to happen, that would result in a system where these very scarce and very skilled resources are being used as efficiently as possible. If the public system has only enough money to compensate them for a certain amount of time, I think they should be allowed to actually also go to the private system and deliver those services for patients in that need.
A controversial suggestion to improve healthcare is cost sharing, the concept of requiring patients to pay for part of the healthcare service. Can you explain how this would actually work?
Sure. Cost sharing is something which, contrary to I would say a lot of popular perception, is actually the norm in other countries with universal healthcare. They of course do it in very different ways. For example, you see the most extreme example in a country like Switzerland, which actually, I should say, spends only a little bit more than Canada, but it has far more resources, far shorter wait times, and still has a robust universal healthcare system. In Switzerland, you have a system where essentially everybody is mandated by private insurance. You are required to pay premiums. If you can't pay your premium, you're given a subsidy and helped along with it. But you also have co-payments that are required. So patients usually are expected to pay a deductible, let's say somewhere between $300 to $500. After that, they're also expected to pay 10% of the cost of their treatment, but there's an annual cap to ensure that it's never more than a certain amount. So, for example, you could say $1,000 or a certain percentage of a person's income. Now, we find various different examples of that in other countries. There are some countries that only have the co-insurance, some countries that only have the deductible, and the rates, of course, vary. And how it would actually be implemented would be up to Canadians, would be up to Albertans. But I think it's important for us to remember that this is a fundamental and very normal part of other countries with universal healthcare. It helps patients remember that these are scarce resources that need to be used responsibly. It helps triage correctly to ensure that patients are not misusing things like emergency room departments. And if designed right, and of course it should be great care should be taken to make sure that it's designed right. It's never intended to be a financial burden. It's never intended to be a situation where patients are choosing between healthcare and their mortgage, but it's meant to just make patients think twice about what's actually happening. And importantly, it needs to happen in conjunction with things like private provision, needs to happen in conjunction with things like activity-based funding. All of these things play off each other, and they're all things that are very commonly found in other countries with universal healthcare that do universal healthcare better with shorter wait times.
Akis Barua, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Vancouver.
Thanks so much for having me on the show.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Have a great night.